Great, great. Well, thanks for the introduction, Hannah. Yeah, so this talk is going to be based on my recent book, as Hannah said, Toy Theory. Um, the challenge for a talk like this is how to say something coherent from quite a lengthy piece of work. Obviously, I could sit here and talk for a week about toys, and I've promised I won't take that long. So what I've tried to do is think about an audience of people interested in games, digital games in particular. And as Hannah said, I've been studying sort of everyday game culture for ooh, a long, long time. I mean, quite a few decades now. And toys have kind of been in the background or woven into that, and they're a kind of object, cultural object, technical object I've always been fascinated by. And I guess it's been a surprise how little critical attention they've been given. I mean, there has been some very interesting work done on toys, but not as much as you might think, considering, well, as I argue in the book, how important they are as cultural objects and technical objects. The book itself, you can see here, it begins with a chapter that is a kind of theory, technocultural theory of toys, and then it takes those ideas and explores it through some different kinds of toys. So dolls, toy soldiers, construction sets, robots, and cinema toys, which is not the most useful of terms, but it means toys and games that are produced as merchandise for popular screen media, cinema, TV in particular. Um, the game, obviously, I don't then have a particular section on games, but they run through in ambiguous ways. I'm just going to try and pull out some of the ways in which toys and games might inform each other. The study of toys and games might inform each other. I'm going to throw out lots of ideas, and then hopefully there'll be plenty of time for questions so you can pick up on anything you think is interesting without me going into waffling on about things you might not find interesting. One thing maybe I should say before we start, and Hannah alluded to this in her introduction, is that a lot of my work, I've been centrally concerned with the relationship between um, the virtual and the actual, the worlds within video games and playful applications, and the kind of everyday embodied worlds in which they are encountered and played with. So this image here is just to highlight that. It's clearly it's an app on a tablet that remediates the very successful Duplo line of Lego designed for small children. And it highlights, I think, something of the, oh, I think just looking at it, you get a sense of both the continuity, the sense that these toys are digitized and still marketed through apps and games, but also the differences, the experience of tapping on a responsive touchscreen to move a block is very different from little hands picking up and clicking together pieces. So I'll come back to that as we talk through. Um, yeah, Hannah mentioned this in her introduction about this is going back uh, a long, long time now, but studying my own children when they were little, playing Lego racers with actual toys as well as with the video game. And I was very interested in the ways in which not only did the video game inspire a kind of imaginative play with the physical objects, but also the ways in which aspects that are specific to a digital world are also translated or transducted into into everyday play. So in this case, just an image on the right. This you can't tell it's a still image, but the child is as they're bouncing the car down these mountains they made out of mega blocks. They do so in the kind of relaxed lunar-like gravity that the game has. So they picked up the physics of the game and embody it in their play. The first time I remember actually specifically studying toys was this, and you might recognize a fresh-faced PhD student in the middle of the image there. This is in the play research group at University of the West of England in Bristol, some years ago now. Uh, and we were talking about toys and just, well, there's a theme that I picked, kind of sowed some seeds for ideas that came through in the book. I won't go into it too much but in the section on construction toys, I was very interested in the relationship between the technical and mechanical characteristics of Lego in particular, but other construction toys like Meccano as well, and how they might work with imaginative play in the way that particular models and play with models unfolds. So if you like, the kind of myth or ideology of Lego is that it is ultimately open-ended and imaginative in play. You know, children can make whatever they like. They're not bounded by, um, you know, the images and models that you get with, say, dolls or cuddly animals. It's open-ended. But I was interested. What I've become very interested in is how particular techniques of Lego, the way it clicks together, the materials it's made from, how that in many ways channels aspects of imaginative play. Imagination and technology work together, and that's the theme that runs all the way through the book. When I started working on the book itself, um, well, first started coming up with the idea for it. It took me a while to get started. It was kind of in the mid 2010s when there was quite a lot of industrial investment in the idea of hybrid game toy systems, or toys to life as they're sometimes known. So you've got Skylanders on the right there. We also had Disney Infinity, Lego Dimensions, and a little bit later we had the Amiibo figurines that Nintendo put out to accompany their games, particularly Switch games. There's also an image for that from a patent for a kind of Internet of Toys system, which we hear about from time to time. And what's striking now is that sort of 10 years later, how the sense of this being the future of toy, commercial toy and game production, just seems to have evaporated. Uh, Disney Infinity, Disney folded the Infinity line after a couple of years. Skylander seems to be on, it was a bit more successful, but seems to be under some kind of hiatus at the moment. Similarly, Lego Dimensions. There are still smaller scale systems and toys that are available that use the same kind of technology, that use kind of near field communication or RFID tags to connect a physical toy or figurine with virtual action, power ups, and so on, characters, and so on, and can store data and transfer it between games. But it certainly hasn't doesn't dominate the toy or game market as we might imagine it would. Oh, there we go. There's an amiibo and a little sequence of images from some microethnography I did with playing Lego Dimensions, which I might return to if I've got time. The argument I make throughout the book, and it kind of is the rationale for it in a way, is that toys are technical, they are technologies. Um, obviously with something like, as you can see in this image, a kind of internet toy system. But we can go back to classical antiquity, and we'll see a little bit later. You can see little mechanical toys, um, everything, we can just jump around the centuries. Toy railways, dolls have had all sorts of technical innovations built into them, from closing eyes to digestion and so on and so on. Um, I would argue that even an unaugmented teddy bear has a, if it, well, it's not strictly speaking a machine, but its material qualities are fundamental to its use as a toy, whether it be it, to cuddle or to manipulate or to pose or to talk to. Its scale, its consist its surface, its tactility, the degree of movement in its limbs and so on are all integral to the ways in which the capacity, the affordance it gives for play. So that's the theme I'll pursue all the way through the talk, but just bear in mind now. And then in the introduction to the book, I make I take this idea and push it a bit further and come up with a kind of thought experiment. A sort of, what if we, the common sense view of the development of the evolution of technology is of devices and objects that are designed in response to material need. A spear, or a club for dispatching an animal for food, a sewing needle for fabricating garments or tents, and so on. My thought experiment then is, what if we rethought technology as being playful before it was instrumental? What if the design of a spear didn't come about through some Paleolithic mind looking at an animal and thinking, what tool can I design to bring that animal down? Rather, what if it was at times in which no hunting was needed, a time of calm or of boredom, of play, a game of throwing sticks to hit a target, noticing that if you added something to the front of the spear, it gave it weight and made it fly more directly. Yeah, I'm not an archaeologist. I don't, in my head, it, it's irrelevant specifically whether that is the case or not. But I think the assumption that technological advance is always driven by need is, I think, doesn't tell the whole story. And I've got one very good example that kind of supports um, this approach, and that is the wheeled animal, and indeed the invention of the wheel itself. In a way, that's the kind of classic archetypal human invention. The invention of the wheel is full of, plenty of jokes of cavemen inventing carving wheels from stone and so on. And yet, the archaeological evidence suggests that wheeled objects were toys or ritual objects before they were practical uh, vehicles for the transport of goods, freight, or people. So the wheel was invented in Mesopotamia around 6000 BC, and it was mainly used for, well, as far as it can be told, it was used for pulling ritual objects in processions. It was used for children's play. Um, it wasn't that practical as for carts or chariots, because in a way you kind of need roads before those sorts of vehicles exist. Similarly, there's a lot of wheeled toy animals in pre-Columbian America, and again used for designed for children to play with. The terrain was too mountainous and rough for wheeled vehicles, so pack animals and human labor used to transport materials. So this is one example of where an invention was for non-instrumental use before it again developed for, uh, as we know today, the kind of fundamental mechanical arrangement for transport. So what then is a toy? Simple dictionary definition: object for a noun, object for a child to play with, a model or miniature replica of something, or as a verb to move or handle an object and absent-mindedly. So we can toy with things. Because I'm British, so I'm using English definitions. Other languages make a distinction between, or would translate into toy. The word for toy would translate into English as play object. So that's that to me would be a broader term than toy. A play object might include um, things like objects used in sport, like balls or shuttlecocks and so on. So there are boundary cases, lots and lots of boundary cases to what are and aren't toys. In a way, what I wasn't interested in the book is I wasn't interested in fixing definitions for toys. I was much more interested in how we can take characteristics of things we think of toys and see how those characteristics can be tracked out into other areas of technology and technoculture, um, through sport, through industry, through all sorts of areas through philosophy, all sorts of areas of human endeavor. So I'll explore some of these terms a little bit. One to pick up on first is the idea that uh, the toy. Okay, well, let me just highlight a few because I'm going to come on to one object for a child to play with, a model or replica, specifically a miniature replica of something. So let's come on to pick up this idea of miniature first. Now, we know a lot of toys are miniature versions of a wider world, reduced down in scale so that children can hold them, arrange them in play, whether that be doll's house furniture, toy animals, or, all sorts of toys that can be considered miniatures. But it's by no means exhaustive, and it's not. I would say that I'd argue that in broad terms, the miniature is more a material rather than imaginative driver of toy design. I'll show you what I mean. So let's have a look. The image on the left, you've got a couple of little wheeled mice that are roughly, well, we've got three mice in this image, this screen, two little ones and a Mickey Mouse, a cuddly Mickey Mouse toy. None of them are miniature. The mice on the left are roughly mouse size, and the mouse on the right is clearly much bigger than a mouse. It's more like a cat or a small dog in scale. What I would argue is salient about questions of scale here is not whether they're miniature or not, it's the relationship of the toy to the child's body in scale, particularly the hands, but it depends on the toy. So the little mice, wheeled mice, need to be that sort of size to be held and pushed around comfortably. The toy on the right is effectively a teddy bear, although it's obviously themed as a Disney character, but it can be held in the hands, as you can see here. It can be manipulated by the hands, and it's soft and pliable. It can be cuddled, so it fits in with the arms. It can be clutched to the child. Um, so we could have a toy elephant that is the same size as the toy mouse. The importance of scale here is in relation to the child's body, not to the original animal. Now, that said, there are aspects of toy culture that where the miniature itself is salient. I think things like doll's houses, um, things like in game culture, the miniatures that are used in tabletop role-playing games, for example, they're they're scaled down so they can be arranged and manipulated, so that's kind of practical. But I think there's something about the level of detail um, and the kind of artisanal skill that goes into designing those tiny little detailed objects. I think there's a kind of aesthetic quality to them that is important. Um, I go into this in more detail in the book, and I borrow a lot from Susan Stewart's book on longing as well, because she writes very interestingly about the miniature. But in general, I'd emphasize that the important relationship in scale is the relationship to the child's hands and body, not just to the original object. And speaking of original objects, are toys replicas? They're rarely straightforward replicas. We do have model railways that are very um, detailed and realistic in their and toy soldiers that pay a lot of attention to historical detail. But most toys, or many toys, are highly stylized, whether that be very modern toys, commodities like Beanie Babies and action figures and fashion dolls. But even, we go back hundreds of years, you see very stylized animals and figures for children's play. So they're not replicas in any straightforward sense. I wouldn't say the significance of He-Man here isn't that he is a model of a man. It's a replica of a media figure, a character from an animated series. Um, that itself was set up to market the toys. There's the kind of circularity there, but there's no kind of there's some reference here to bodybuilding physiology, but even that's exaggerated and impossible. Again, the Mickey Mouse isn't a replica of a mouse. It's a replica of a media character that it doesn't look great. It's a very stylized version of a mouse, even in its drawn form. Um, and then there are some toys that don't make any attempt to replicate non-toy objects or animals. A spinning top is a good example of that. Pogo sticks, frisbees, kites, all these kinds of things. They are machines for play, not models of worldly objects for imaginative play. They're for kind of physical, vertiginous kind of play. A famous image advertising campaign from Lego in the 1970s that celebrates much of what many people hold dear about Lego, which is its capacity to, for as I mentioned earlier, this idea that it optimizes imaginative expression in 3D form through its bricks. So Lego itself, it's kind of a replica of bricks. We call them bricks, the pieces, but it's not. Yeah, and they might be used to build houses in a similar way to laying bricks, but they're quite different in other ways. And then the model this girl's made isn't. It looks like it's some sort of house, but it's no copy of a house. It's not. She's not looked at her own house and reconstructed it. It's something that has arisen from the interplay of the possibilities of these pieces clicking together, maybe some randomization as to what piece came to hand as she was searching through the pile or box of pieces, and then her own imaginative storytelling about what these figures are doing and what kind of environment they're in. So we might say it's a model, but it's not a model of anything. And it's not a model for anything. It's not like an architect's model. It's not a design for something else in the future. It's a model that exists in its own modeling, its own toying. And this is something I pick up a lot in the book, and I won't dwell on it now because I go on about it for hours. But it, I found the concept of simulacra compelling all the way through. So the idea that toys have this sense of being a copy, but they really aren't. They're copies without original. And this is a model without an original, a model without a future, if you like. The important thing I would say about we often think about simulacra as being about the fake, but I think simulacra aren't fake. They're very real. They're real objects. They're real technologies. They're just a different kind of technology that their salience is less to do with their um, representing or signifying something else and more in their own material and aesthetic possibilities. And while we're on this kind of semiotic theme, I'm just going to add another term to the mix. Getting away from this idea that toys are mere representations of a bigger adult world. Rather, they are technologies within that world and that relate to it in all sorts of complex ways. So I picked up on the idea of the synecdoche. So a toy isn't a metaphor, a Meccano crane isn't a metaphorical crane, it's an actual crane. It's a very small one, but it works, it can pick things up, it functions mechanically in the same way. So it's a part of a whole. It's not a metonym, it's not a small thing representing a whole, it's actually part of a whole. In this case, with Meccano, a world of industry. Um, so not only is it an actual crane, if you look at the what it's made from, what its components are, these are very small but identical in other ways to industrial processes of materials. This is pressed steel, held together with nuts and bolts, mass produced in factories. Um, it's a modular design. So these are standardized units that can be constructed in all sorts of to make all sorts of different machines and objects. Similarly, Lego would be a kind of thermoplastic version of this. Again, it's modular. It has a technical underpinning system that allows different constructions to be put together. Um, so it's part and parcel of these bigger industries, industrial processes, but rendered small for playful use rather than instrumental use. And okay, again, I'm just quick mention then of something I pick up through the book uh, that we can see at moments, key moments where toys, technical toys, become expressions of a dominant technological paradigm and imaginary, whether that be so Meccano as a guy expressing something of the standardization of the industrial age, the modularity, um, uh, the programmable automata of the 18th century that epitomized and dramatized the clockwork worldview and cosmology of the Enlightenment. So this is a little figure that could write and draw, depending on how it's programmed, driven by clockwork, which is at the time how the universe was seen as working and the way in which um, and these objects allow people to think through or ponder ideas of consciousness and reason through technology. And we can go right back to the Bronze Age, where these the military societies of the Bronze Age were um, both modelled as toy soldiers, but using the technology of bronze smelting that was underpinned those economies and cultures and so on. And then we can say right up to the present day. I promised I'd talk about games, so here's the first mention, uh, where digital games become. I've argued this for quite a while now. Um, Expressive of all sorts of levels of technological imagery of the information in the digital age, whether that be virtual space, virtual community, algorithms, artificial intelligence, and simulation. The games are not a representation of that world, they're fully part of it, and they in many ways drive it. So they're synecdoches in that sense. So what perhaps one of the most important aspects then of those definitions is these are objects for children to play with. And it is in play that the toy realizes its technical capacities and aesthetic capacities. I'm intrigued by this quote from Gregory Bateson. A baby doll is not a real baby, obviously, but it is not a baby. So in play, when the child is engaging with it, it is at that time a baby of thought. Of course, there are toys for adults, so it's not. This isn't a strict definition. Bottle railways, where you can see, yeah, you might recognize the character on the left from Toy Story 2, the whole dynamic of collectibles, toys that have to be kept in their box and not played with to keep their value. But I'm not really interested in adult play, I'm interested in children's play. And in children's play, toys can, how to phrase this section? In the book, I'm quite critical of a substantial amount of, if you like, media and cultural critique of toy culture that takes the design of the toy, its packaging and its merchandising, its marketing, as indicative of the kinds of messages that the children will receive in playing with those toys. Now, the obvious example are things like Barbie and Action Man, these sort of gendered toys with clear adult roles being communicated to children. But we can see all sorts of toys, even Lego. People are critical of the way in which Lego is marketed. I think this is where a kind of ethnographic or microethnographic approach is absolutely vital because in studying children's play, we see a much more complex and much less linear or causal relationship between design, mediatization, and the actual dramas and characters and actions that are materialized as children play. The classic example is the cardboard box. Everyone, this sort of neutral container, light container that can be transformed into all sorts of play environments. I've included a couple of images from a book called book series called My Naughty Little Sister. In this, the child in the image, she's got a friendly uncle who makes her toys. So he's made a homemade doll's house and a horse on wheels. But the child in playing transforms both of these so that she's tucked her teddy bear on the back of the horse, so it turned it into a pram. The She's taken the furniture out of the doll's house and put toy pots and pans in and turned it into an oven. So these objects are completely transformed through imaginative play, but there's this is not it's not completely free form. Again, it's interplay of imagination and materiality. So the horse works as a pram because it's got wheels and a handle to be pushed, and it's got an area that is flat enough for the teddy bear to be laying on. Similarly, the house, the, the front of it opens up like an oven door, and it has two floors inside that work perfectly well as shelves in an oven. Another example that did rounds on social media about 10 years ago is this. So we can try and confound gender stereotypes, but children will play the games they want to play. So in this case, the dolls, the cars are enough like people, they're slightly longer than they are wide, and they're the right scale to fit with the dolls' beds, so they can become characters to be tucked in and nurtured. This is an example from my own house. My youngest son, when he was very little, found out a kind of broken battleships game and turned it into a drawing toy. So he couldn't quite make it out, but there's a kind of symmetrical butterfly that's been drawn here with the little pegs. So rather than it being a simulation of maritime warfare, it becomes a sort of stylized design or drawing toy. So as Miguel Thicart points out, toys are defined by their cultural and their technical dimensions. The toy as expression and the toy as thing. I would say as well the toy as machine. Um, and I've touched on these dimensions. Scale, I've talked about a certain amount. Tactility, the feel of wood or cuddly fabric or plastic or metal. All these things are important. Or slime, for example, tactility is absolutely key. Also, something that I think is very important is operability, manipulability. So again, these work as little machines because they can be pushed and opened and so on. Their technical material aspects help inform the play. And the relationship to the hands is nearly always crucial. Okay, I'm going to skip over that. So let me get on to games, toys and games. Lego do a nice line of blurring that particular boundary. Um, with a series of board games that are constructed out of Lego pieces. So there's been a lot of discussion in game studies over what is a game. I'm not going to attempt to define it here. I don't think you probably can. But I just want to maybe point out two broad categories of games that might help us tease out something about the relationship with toys, games, and play and technology. So we have classic games that rule-bound, competitive, with clear outcomes, win or lose. So snakes and ladders, a lot of board games, chess, many video games, um, against artifacts like SimCity, which Will Wright, the designer of the game, himself talked about as a toy rather than as a game. For, for quite this reason, um, it's not competitive, and there's no win state. It's just an unfolding simulation. The play is in tweaking with um, the parameters of the simulation, population growth, investment, tax, and so on and so on. So it has that sense of, uh, a, if you're looking at two extremes, a game would be something with fixed rules and outcomes that kind of, I hesitate to say limits because that sounds derogatory or negative. It channels or focuses playful activity according to its rules against a toy which is less determined in the type of play it affords. Um, whether you consider SimCity a toy or a game, I think is up to you. To me, it still feels very quite game-like. There's not that much capacity for play, open play with it. Um, okay. There are various objects that have been marketed over the decades called digital toys, most of which, if not all, are game-based. So Simon is a sort of memory game. Tamagotchi is effectively a little video game in a plastic egg, but it feels like a toy because it can be carried around. Um, but it effectively is a game. And Furby may be a bit more borderline. There's a certain sort of level of or level of progress and development that's coded into Furby that the player or the toyer, the child, uh, unlocks through interaction with it. But it can also be turned off and just played with as if it were like a not a non-smart cuddly toy. So the distinctions are blurred. Another example that became very interested in writing the book is my chapter on toy soldiers. So again, we have the sort of Bronze Age warrior, we have the 1970s action man, the sort of post-war plastic soldiers, army men that we think of as toys. But they kind of shade into game-like game objects. So the tabletop war game, we have these miniatures that are toys to some extent, but they also start to function more as placeholders in the simulation of a battlefield. And of course, that becomes very evident in digital war games. This is a game called Advance Wars, but there's all sorts of simulations of warring games that in which uh, these little token-like figures function to visualize and strategize in the theatre of war rather than uh, operating in quite the same way as playing with toy soldiers. To the extent that in many computer games, and particularly war board games, the tokens become actual abstract tokens rather than figures of soldiers or vehicles. So thinking again of Will Wright and his argument that SimCity is a toy, got me thinking whether open world games like particularly the most recent Legend of Zelda games, are these game worlds or toy worlds? They're not. We can play without really engaging with rules. Uh, I mean, there are sort of rules built of gravity and so on built in, but we can roam at will and collect and forage. Um, so in that sense, in Will Wright's sense, it's this the game would be more toy-like. Um, there are moments like this of combat where maybe it comes game again because we're back to win-lose situations. Um, so it's a kind of game within the toy world. And there are also a number of other games that are explicitly coded into these toy worlds. So a kind of horseback archery game on the left and boom bam golf game on the right, which I haven't found yet my own playing of this game. But these are, yeah, kind of mini games, obviously they're referred to as mini games. They're bounded temporally and spatially and by particular rules and win states. So if there's games in the toy world, we also have toys in game worlds. So Sackboy in Little Big Planet is very much figured as a toy-like avatar. Um, and we get a number of video games that figure toys explicitly, and not just so this is a particular track in Super Mario Kart 8, but it reminds me of older games like Micro Machines. So suddenly the cartoon-like but ostensibly full, adult scale world of Mario Kart transforms itself into a tiny little toy world, micro world within the everyday. I think there's also something here about I'm particularly fascinated. I want to write about puzzles um, in which sections of games in this again with Zelda and Wind Waker on the left here, uh, kind of open world exploration, but with certain sections that are very much toy-like in their puzzle nature, or Laurel and the Laser Eyes, in which the whole game, everything in it is puzzle-like, is toy-like. So coming back to Sackboy, thinking about there are all sorts of objects in digital games that are toy-like, vehicles and figures in particular. So dolls, cars, planes, and toy animals. All of them, they are objects that we can manipulate, that we manipulate and deploy in play. They the mode of playing is more directed by the game than the kind of open free play of children on the floor with toys. But there's still great there's still enough similarity to play around with those ideas, I think. And as we just hinted there, there's the question for me would be then, well, the obvious question is what are the differences? Um, or to put it more boldly, what's gained and what is lost? Um, I started off with an image of a Lego on a tablet, and here we have it again. So what is lost, or what is certainly transformed, is that facet of toy play that I emphasized right at the start, which is about um, tactility and manipulability, the relationship of the toy to the hands and fingers. The hands and fingers are manipulating, putting together, moving, positioning, and so on. Um, that is, I mean, the hands and fingers are still there, but they're separated by the touch screen. And it's a kind of tactility at one remove. What do we gain? I mean, on one hand, there's Lego is expensive, so there's like you can have a lot of Lego in these games that you might not have the actual physical toy. Um, Other than that, games bring maybe a more mediatized experience. There are often narratives, there's music, there are obviously game-like elements, challenges, puzzles, um, cutscenes, and so on. So there are payoffs, if you like. And we can look at it, and it depends on the kind of game. I was thinking about what how particular types of toys are transformed. So the Sims could be kind of dolls and doll's houses, toy soldiers in Call of Duty there, toy cars in Mario Kart, construction sets in SimCity, toy animals or even pets in games like Nintendogs. And all of these have the payoff is between a certain kind of openness of expression and the action and drama and feedback that we get from a, digital game. there's quite in the start of the book. Uh, I do there's an account of this microethnography, and it's very. I won't read it out now, but if you're interested, please have a look. The book's open access, so you can have a look at this. And it was very telling, the relationship between constructing this physical elements of the Lego Dimensions game that is needed to access to place the characters and make them realize them in the virtual world. And the difference was it was a kind of difference of rhythm and temporality as much as of imagination. There's you could flick through the on-screen instructions very quickly, and the software would build this portal very quickly. Whereas following the paper instruction and building with actual Lego took longer. So there was one of the children was really torn between the kind of pleasure of building with Lego, which he loved, and the kind of insistent pull of the screen saying, "Engage with me now as quickly as you want." Um, So I think on that note, I am going to stop and see if anyone has any questions. Thank you.